You're going to be resentful and bitter in many situations because you don't get what you want. And if you watch that resentment and bitterness, you'll see that it produces fantasies that can be unbelievably dark. They want to live in this wish fulfillment fantasy where everybody can have all the sex they want all the time, and it's always wonderful and no one gets hurt. And it's like, sorry, that just doesn't work in the real world. And I've had a variety of very strange experiences that have convinced me that we know very little about anything. You won't be able to maintain a positive relationship with your parents if you do so at the cost of your own destiny. Did I fail any classes in university? I had to retake stats. I wasn't good at stats. I got it eventually. 225 pounds isn't bad. Yeah, well, I only weighed 160, so, you know, it was pretty good. But it was funny because it was only one day I was able to manage that. I could do 200 with a fair bit of regularity in a bench press, but one day, man, I did 205 and that worked, and I did 210 and that worked, and I got all the way to 225 and I was never able to duplicate it again. So that was pretty interesting. They're just going to write you off because it's easier than taking you seriously. If you take a rat, lab rat, typical lab rat is, you know, genetically bred to be identical with many other lab rats, and he lives alone in a cage, and he's got a pretty miserable rat life because rats are social animals and they don't like to live in cages by themselves. And you can get a lab rat in a cage addicted to cocaine in no time flat, and he'll like press a lever for cocaine reward, pretty much to the exclusion of all else, including sex and often including food. But if you take that same rat and you put him in a rat family, you know, in a rat social hierarchy, in a rat environment, and give him something that rat like to do so that he can be satisfied, it's very difficult to get him addicted to cocaine. We have a problem of meaningful engagement. I know it's expensive, but so is not having a life. Find someone you can talk to, and then make it, and someone practical, probably a behavioral therapist would be best, and then have them set goals with you and help you strategize to stay on track week to week. That's the best thing, or to set that up with a friend if you can't do it with a therapist. My brother is a soldier in Iraq. As a clinical psychologist, what should one do when coming from such a chaotic place back to a tame and structured one? Well, I guess that would depend to some degree on exactly the nature of his experiences in Iraq. So it's hard for me to elaborate on that further. I mean, I would say, though, that one thing he could really do, and this is somewhat self-serving, or could appear to be somewhat self-serving, I suppose, is I would strongly recommend that your brother do the self-authoring suite when he comes back, because it'll help him, and probably concentrate on the future authoring program to begin with, because it might take a while when he gets back before he can meditate on his experiences without that meditation being harmful. So, for example, there's pretty good evidence if you've had a traumatic experience that you shouldn't re-subject yourself to the traumatic experience repeatedly before, say, about 18 months or something like that is passed. And it isn't exactly obvious why that's the case, but there's a pretty good literature indicating that it is. So I would say that when he makes the transition from Iraq back to normative society, that the first thing he should do is generate a plan, a plan about how he would, and this would be the same even if you were coming out of something like prison or making a change, a radical change in your occupation, is you need a plan, right? You need a plan so that you can because you can't just make that adjustment without knowing what you're doing. So that's what I would recommend. And if he does come back traumatized, then I would say, traumatized soldiers often have to develop a very comprehensive philosophy of good and evil, and so that would either mean perhaps talking to a decent clinical psychologist about what his experiences were, or perhaps reading some of the literature. And I've outlined those books on my website at jordanbpeterson.com that can be really helpful in understanding and helping someone understand the evils of atrocity and warfare. I'm going to talk about something that happened to the comic book character Superman in the late 70s. So Superman was extraordinarily popular from the 1930s right up to the 1970s. But one of the things that happened is that as he became more and more popular, he also got more and more powerful, right? So by the 80s, Christ, you could bounce a hydrogen bomb off Superman's chest and he could juggle planets. And, that's all well and good, except what kind of adventure is he going to have? There's only a certain number of things you can do with the chessboard and the chessmen. You want to develop your web of connections, your social network, and of course you want to do that in any enterprise, right? So it's a challenge for introverts in general. Loki Doodle says, I cleaned my room finally. That's good. I hope that it has a pronounced positive effect on the rest of your life. When I cleaned my room this weekend, it made it easier for me to finish this chapter that I've been obsessing about. So that was quite interesting. So, cleaning and organizing your room is no joke. It's a great meditative exercise, especially if you take it seriously. And you're not trying to make it look neat, although that's not a bad aim. You're trying to turn the room into somewhere that the person you want to be could live. Put yourself together and prevail.